All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Tips and Tricks for the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund Grant Program. My name is Diana Maxwell. I'm the Senior Grants Manager at the National Trust, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Lawana Holland Moore, who is the Associate Program Officer for the Action Fund here at the Trust as well. And so we're going to have a great, not too long session for you today and kind of fill you in on just a little overview of the Action Fund. I'm going to walk you through some of the things people have issues with when they're trying to use the actual form, the technology, and then we'll finish up with some frequently asked questions. So off to you, Lawana.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our tips and tricks for Action Fund grants. And I'm Lawana Holland Moore, Associate Program Officer of the Action Fund. And today we'll share info about the Action Fund and its National Grant Program. First, I'd like to tell you about the Action Fund itself, which was created in 2017 in response to the events in Charlottesville. The Action Fund is committed to crafting a narrative that expands our view of history by telling the full story of African American historic sites. We are a multi-year, $25 million initiative, and we hope to continue to draw attention to the remarkable and still largely unrecognized collection of places and stories of African American activism and achievement. African American history is American history, and through the elevation of those stories, we contribute to that narrative. We have just wrapped up year 3 of our grant cycle and awarded $1.6 million to 27 African American historic sites and organizations nationwide in 4 categories: capital projects, which is our bricks and mortar restoration work; programming and interpretation; project planning; and organizational capacity. And organizational capacity are things such as hiring director level staff, part-time to full-time staff, and also board governance and training and nonprofit training. We have also awarded a total of $4.3 million in funding to 65 sites and organizations so far, so that they may accomplish their goals. And now, as we're entering year 4 of our grant cycle, I'll turn you over to Diana so she can tell you more about how to submit an LOI.
Great. Thank you, Lawana. Yeah, and some of the most often questions that are asked to us are about the LOI, and people having some issues potentially with them. So we thought this would be a good opportunity to just walk you through it. So when you get to the site, you'll go to our guidelines page, and then at the bottom of that page is a link to this application. So this is a separate login from the National Trust. So if you have a login for the National Trust website, for Forum or Forum Connect, it's going to be different than that. So don't try to use yours there. You don't need an access code once you get there. That access code is right up on the top, but you don't need it. The form is going to be available right below it. And just for purposes of discussion, I may be using LOI and application interchangeably today. Basically, it's the same process. So if I'm saying application, assume that it goes for the same thing for LOIs as well. So you can preview the application or the LOI without logging in, but in order to save your information, you do need to make sure that you're logged in. So if you've never logged in before, you can just start an account for your organization. You may get a warning when you do that the EIN is in use, your tax ID number is in use, and you can click past that. And if you've got a lot of time or have a little bit of time, if it's not the day before the application or the LOI is due, go ahead and reach out to us in the grants team and we can connect you to your existing account. But if it's the day before, 2 days before, and you just need to fill in that account, don't worry about it. Just click past that warning and we can fix it on the back end to kind of connect your applications, your LOIs. Someone may have filled out a grant application, 3 or 7 years ago or something that has nothing to do with you, but so don't worry about that. That's not a big deal. So this is sort of where you'll start, but I'll walk you through the rest now. So this is what it'll look like if you scroll down a little bit. You can see that apply button on the top right, and then below on the bottom left, you can see the preview button. And this gives you a little bit of information on the site, and then you will click apply to get through to the LOI application. So once you're on that LOI page, you'll see a few things there. First, you'll see the contact info of who's filling out the form. And note that there can only be one email address linked to an application. So only one person can be logging in to fill it out, except we do have this collaborate button you'll see up at the upper right that in blue that will allow you to share the form with someone else. So you can allow them to just view it, you can allow them to edit it, or you can allow them to submit the form too. So this is great if you are, on a board and you're filling it out, but then a president of the board needs to sign off on it or something like that. Or if you just want someone else to be able to take a look at it for you. They will get a link in their email and they'll have to come in and set up an account through our system, but then they'll be able to use it once they've logged in or set up an account. If you have any issues with this, you can email us at grants@savingplaces.org, which is the best email for us. And since we're working remotely right now, email is the best way to reach us. Also on this page, you can see that I've circled question list, and that will make a PDF of the questions on the form. So if you don't want to collaborate and use the collaborate tool, but you do want to share the questions, I know sometimes people like to answer the questions in a Word document and then bring them in to the form. You can do that way. You can pull them as a PDF and then copy paste them over to a Word doc. So next, as you scroll down the LOI page, it'll look a little bit like this. There's a number of different types of questions that you'll be asked. There are open-ended questions that you type in, there's multiple choice, and some have upload spots. So if you will notice, some of the questions, most of them actually have little asterisks, and those are required questions. So you will have to answer those. If you don't answer them, then you will not, the system will not let you submit the form. If you go over, you'll see, especially on projects or questions where there is sort of a bigger text box, that you will have a character limit and you won't be able to go over that character limit, or again, you'll get an error message when you try to submit the form. So you'll also get the error message if you try to submit something from one of the upload spots and the file's too big. So this is sort of a lot to just be aware of, but I'll help you tell you what to do to work through each of those steps. Essentially for anything that's a word issue, you just need to make it smaller, edit yourself. But you do want to make sure that you remember that spaces do count as characters, so they will count towards your character count on the form. So the photos here are an example of where you would upload a photo. So we're going to ask that you submit at least 2 photos with this LOI. And what we're asking for are photos that show sort of what your project is about. But if your project is working on a specific building or a specific site, then please do send us a photo that'll show a current overall view. Even if it's an interior project, if you can send us at least 1 exterior photo, that's really helpful for us just to sort of place your project in wherever it is. If your project, and we do want those photos to be the best quality that you can send and obviously still fit in with the file size maximum there. If you don't have a specific building or site that you're working on, or if your project is for organizational capacity, we just ask that you upload photos that are representative of your work. And then the last thing we'll have you upload related to the photos is a Word document, or you could use a PDF too, but that tells us what the photo is, when it was taken, and who took it, who the credit is. And for this LOI, we ask for you not to send us any historical photos. We just want to see current ones, but you will have the option in the application later to send historical photos. And so this is an example. This is a good example of a photo from a previous grantee that shows, just like where the buildings are, what their basic condition is, and helps us sort of have a good mental picture. You got to remember that for the most part, we're not familiar with your project. So it's not super helpful sometimes to see maybe just a portion of a damaged roof or something like that if we don't know what the rest of the building looks like. So once you have filled in the information you want to fill in, maybe you can do that all in one sitting. Maybe you need to kind of stop for the day, take a break, go out and get more information or come back or whatever you need to do. You can log off and then you can log back into the system and edit the LOI. So this is important. When you come back to the site, you're going to log back in, but instead of going to that page to create a new application, a new LOI, which you don't want to do. Otherwise, you're just going to be creating a new one. So you want to just edit the LOI you started. So you should end up on a page that looks like this when you log in. But if you don't, click on the little house button in the icon, the house icon in the menu bar at the top. And then you'll see it'll list sort of whatever you have currently and active requests or historical ones. And then you just click the blue where it says edit LOI, and that'll take you back to your LOI. Because you don't want to have two LOIs out there if you only need to submit one. And then finally, when you're ready to submit, you'll see down at the bottom of the page, it says save LOI or submit LOI. So if you do need to log out and come back, you can hit save at the bottom, or if you just want to save it, it does auto save as well. But I know sometimes I like to make sure that I save it if I'm working on something important like this. And then you just submit the LOI at the end. And you may, if something's missing or something that's required, or you don't know where you've gone over the character count or something like that, you'll get an error message, and it usually highlights in red where you need to go adjust something. And actually, there was one more thing before we get to the questions. If you do have a file that's too large that you need to submit, you can email it to us. So if you can't shrink your photo down, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the FAQs, but there is a way to get around that if your photo is not or is too big. So now I'll have Lawana come back and we will answer some questions. Okay, looks like you are muted.
Here we go.
There we go. So, all right, let me pull up my question list. We've got quite a few years of questions here, so we have some good ones that get asked a lot. So hopefully they'll answer your questions. So we'll just kind of go back and forth here, and I'll ask you, and then you can ask me later. So we'll start with some eligibility questions. The first being, can you apply for multiple categories of grants?
Absolutely. We get this one a lot. Applying for more than one category does not keep you, we don't weigh it against you. It's just fine. If you're putting in for capital project and programming at the same time, they're weighed individually. We look at each project on its own merit.
Great. And the thing though to remember is that we'll only invite one of those back to submit a full application. So what if an organization has applied for a grant before but been turned down? Should they just not apply again?
We absolutely, we encourage you to apply. Again, this is a multi-year initiative. So just because you may have applied and didn't make it through the year before or both years, it's fine. We've had applicants that have applied over multiple years now and have made it through. So just because you didn't get this year does not mean that it won't happen for you the next. But I will tell you though that this is not just a competitive grant, it's an extremely competitive grant. So please keep that in mind, but definitely keep trying.
Yeah, and it's such a different mix every year, so you never know sort of what's going to come in. What about applying for other National Trust grants and an Action Fund grant? Is that good? Is that bad? What do you think?
Well, the thing is that applying for an Action Fund grant does not keep you from applying for any other National Trust grant. In fact, we encourage people to contact the grants department and let them know about your project to see what other monies are available, what other funding is available for your project.
Great, yeah. Okay, so this is probably beyond how do I log in? This is probably the number 2 most asked question, which is why didn't I get a grant last time?
Well, there are so many reasons, and a lot of that has to do with the factors that come into play when we're evaluating. You might be up against a project that's in the same city, the same state, the same region. We're also looking at, are you in a similar theme? There are so many factors that come into play when we're really thinking about it, that we tell people that just because you didn't get a grant last time, it kind of goes along with the whole applying, doesn't mean you won't next year. It just might mean, for instance, there may have been a lot of projects from, let's say, Texas. So those are the type of things to take into account.
Very good. So people, I think, get a little concerned sometimes if they're eligible to apply based on what kind of organization they are. So does it count if they're a state designated nonprofit? What if it's a church? Like who's eligible for this?
Well, in terms of if you're a nonprofit, first of all, it's nice to have that 501c3 designation, but that doesn't stop you. You can actually still apply for it. If it's in a pending status, that's fine. Also, some organizations and sites might have a fiscal sponsor instead of being a 501c3, also acceptable. And when we're talking about the types of institutions that can apply, we're talking public agencies like city, local governments, state governments. There are churches, churches and religious institutions. You're also eligible, that's fine.
Right, and schools too. Sometimes schools they're quasi-government agencies a lot of times, so that's fine. And I would just say that with the fiscal sponsor, we prefer not to do it if we don't have to, but especially if it's pending, don't let that keep you from applying. Yeah. And then do the sites if there's a site related to the project, does the site have to be listed on the National Register?
No, actually, you don't have to be listed in the register. That's fine. It's just that our requirement follows the 50-year guideline. So you can also be state locally designated too, but it's not required.
Great. And then what about new construction? So I understand, if I'm going to build a brand new building for something, that doesn't seem like historic preservation. But what if I want to build a monument?
Well, actually, this grant does not count towards monuments and statues. And we get that question a lot. But also, when we're talking about new construction, that does mean things like new buildings. Also, unfortunately, additions are also counted as new construction as well.
Mm-hmm. And sort of tying into that too is archival work or archival, management of the collections or preservation of the collections themselves.
This grant covers, think of it as this grant covers the structure that the collections would be housed in. Actual archives and collections are not covered under this grant. Also think of it in terms of curatorial maintenance is not covered for them as well.
Great, thanks, Luana. And then I think the last one is there's been a little confusion, especially last year, I think, over the organizational capacity category. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the 2 tracks that can take and what that means for how much money you can request?
Sure. For organizational capacity building, the first track that we are talking about involves hiring and staff. So the grant under organizational capacity covers hiring a new senior or director level leadership staff position. Or it can also go towards increasing your current part-time staff to full-time status. And for the hiring track, that ranges from $100,000 to $150,000, but it's over a 2-year period. The second track for organizational capacity involves board convenings and governance, as well as nonprofit management trainings and organizational development activities such as strategic planning. And for that track, you can request up to $50,000.
Thank you, Luana. That's really helpful. And I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. He's a little crazy. So now I think we have some questions more about application how-tos.
Well, I guess the first question would be, can you mail your letter of intent?
You cannot. I mean, you could, but no one would look at it because it's not able to be accepted in the program unless you fill it out through our online form. So please don't send us anything in the mail. It won't get reviewed.
Now, let's say that my file is too big to upload. What should I do?
That's right. And I touched a little bit on this earlier because I forgot that we talked about it in the frequently asked questions. But what you can do is send it to us. We have a little bit more leeway on our end to submit things from our side of things. So the first step is to try to shrink it. So if it's a photo, there's some programs online that you can download or you can upload your photo to make it a little bit smaller. If it's a PDF, try to shrink it down using Adobe. But if that doesn't work, then send us an email at grants@savingplaces.org. And if the file, you can attach the file to an email, you can send the file then. Just let us know what project you want it to be attached to and who you are, and we should be able to attach it from our end. If it is so big that you need to have a Dropbox link or some other file transfer sharing, just send us an email first before you send the link so that we can be ready for it. Those things can look a little spammy sometimes, so we just don't want to disregard something that is an important thing.
Okay, so let's say that my project has a lot of interest and people who are really excited about supporting or backing it. Can I include a letter of support on my letter of intent?
That's such a great question because we're so excited when you have community support and other organizations that are excited for you too and love your work. But we don't have a spot for letters of support on the LOI. There are some spots later on the application process, but it's just we're trying to not have our reviewers read too many things when they're reviewing the LOI. So the way to help with this is to show that community or support for your project, particularly if you have relationships with consultants or other organizations. Include that in your project description. Talk about work that maybe you've done with that group that's led up to this work, or what you plan to do with another organization. So you can share with us that information in a different way. And then you can also just know that they're ready in case if you're going to be invited to submit an application, and then they can be ready to submit a letter then.
Now, of course, this is something that happens. I'm having trouble logging into my account in the grants application portal. What should I do?
This is probably question number 3 of the most asked questions we get. And we'll have that link to the website is always at the bottom of the guidelines page on our forum page. And I think the number one thing to remember is that you don't need us to reset your password, especially if it's after office hours. We're here 9 to 5 usually Eastern time. So if it's after office hours and you're working on this after you've worked for the day or whatever, you can reset your password yourself. It'll send you a link from the login page and you can get there. Otherwise, if it's a regular workday, send us an email, grants@savingplaces.org, and we'll try to work it through with you. If you can, try to log in before the week the application is due or the day that it's due. We will see questions spike quite a bit at that time, and it's just hard for us to get back to you so quickly. We'll do the very best we can, but we can't promise anything. So if you can try to log in before the end of the period for submitting, that's really helpful, just to make sure you can get in and everything makes sense and everything is clear that way.
Well, now I also just want to tell everyone that when you do submit your LOI, I really want you to kind of really think about your project. And because one thing that's very important is it's not so much about how your project description is written as much as what you're conveying within it.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest things is that your ask should be clear. We love hearing about the history of your site or organization, but we really need to know about what you're trying to do. So the more clear your description is of the project that you're actually trying to accomplish, and I tell everyone, try to think of it as what can I accomplish within the grant period, the time of the grant period, and to really go through that and really think about it, prioritize what you really need. And that's always really helpful to think through.
I think that's a good point, Luana. And kind of going along with that, if your project is part of a larger project, you know, if you're doing a really big rehabilitation project, but our grant would only fund a part of that. So say you're doing, you know, the roof and windows and, you know, preserving or restoring the floors and all kinds of things, but our project would only go towards the windows. Please do mention that overall project, but bring out that smaller piece is what we're funding. It's sometimes hard to pick out of a big, well, especially once we get to a budget on the application form, it's hard to pick out what our grant would be used for, especially if you have other funding that is covering other pieces of it.
And it's fine to state if you already have consultants in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and also if the work is in progress. You know, if it's in progress, what stage are you at? What do you, just like Diana was saying, what part of the project do you think that our funding can help cover for you?
Right. And we can't cover a part of the project that's already started. We can't cover work that's already happened. But if you're asking us for phase 2 and phase 1 is underway, that's great. And just let us know that. So then we know that you're on the right track and you're going to be able to complete the project in basically about a year for most of the projects. And then, as Luana said, 2 years for those hiring position projects. Yeah, I think that's probably most of what we wanted to say, right?
I think so.
Great. So I do have just, I think, one more. Where are we? There we go. One more slide. Just, you know, a few final tips to remember, especially around that LOI form. If your organization is already in the system, you might get a warning. It's okay to click past that. Spaces count in the character count. You must answer questions with an asterisk. Contact the grants team if you have any questions, grants@savingplaces.org, the email's up there. And then the LOIs are due, and I don't think we've touched on this yet, but the LOIs are due at 11:59 local time, your local time. So our friends on the West Coast, we're not gonna make them lose out a few hours because of our East Coast homeland. You have that time. So I think, thank you all so much for watching the session, and Luana, thank you for joining me on it. And you know, all of you, if you have questions, we're here to answer, and we wish you good luck, and we can't wait to hear about your projects.
Good luck, everyone.